And feel free to contact us for anything related to Real Women Summit and other activities that we are having in Project Life Design. Thank you so much, Mr. Kambamba.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. I'm going to do something a little different today. Usually, presentations usually have a PowerPoint, but what I'm going to do is something I don't think that's ever been done before on a brand presentation. And I'm gonna have a little background music playing in the background just to give it some cadence and some pace and give it a different feel. So, Coach Winnie has done a tremendous job already of introducing me, and I've titled my brand presentation A Page in the Life of a Storyteller, the Life and Times of Kampambama Buluki. A brand, in essence, is a story about people and their craft, or a person and their craft. There would be no brands without people. There would be no Bentley without Bentley. There would be no Colgate Palmolive without Colgate. There would be no Coca Cola without the founder of Coca Cola. So every brand is a story of a person. This is my story. A story has three parts. A story has a past, a story has a present, and a story has a future. The past is the foundation and the essence of a story. The present is why it is, and the past and the present give us the future. I always say if you want to find out about a person or their brand, dig in their trash for a week, and it will give you a very good idea of what their brand is and who the person is. From how we dress, to what we eat, to our vocation and who we interact with. That, in essence, are parts of our brand. Now, I once heard from an American artist whose name was Pimp C that on TV there's no temperature. They asked him why he was wearing a fur coat in a music video and it was 100 degrees outside, and he said on TV there's no temperature. So I dressed the way I'm dressed for a very particular reason. The tie I'm wearing is also part of my story and tells my story. And as the story unfolds, I'll continue to take off the different layers and bring the different layers of the story. My grandfather was an accomplished and published writer. He was particularly a writer in the travel genre, and the travel genre at the time was a new genre in Zambia. And his work sits in the library of Zambia, the University of Zambia Library, in the special section, as well as in the American Library of Congress as well. In 1973, he published a book called Umwana Shenda, and this is the only title he ever wrote under the name Laban Wellington Mabuluki. But nevertheless, it set the foundation for who I am today and the story of my craft as well. I was named after my grandfather 11 years later, and I never met him. But as they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as you begin to see. So that's the foundation of my craft. Okay. All right. We're back. Pardon the interruption. These things do happen. This is Africa. It's a continental problem. It's a global problem. It's also part of storytelling. What would be a story without a little bit of adversity and a few challenges? But here we have to overcome challenges and solve problems because that's what we do as storytellers. So, for those of you who just joined us, and for those of you who are with me from the beginning, I was talking briefly about the genesis and the foundations of my storytelling. And I spoke about my grandfather publishing a book in 1973 called Umana Shenda. And that was the genesis and foundation of my story to tell 11 years later after I had published his book when I was born. So that gives you an idea roughly how old I am. And for those of you who are listening, you now also know what my middle names are or what the LW stands for in my initials. So one day, I was on the bus with my mom and I began shouting, pointing outside the window, saying, Land Rover 110, Land Rover 110. And people on the bus began to wonder and said, this child crazy, what's wrong with him? But that's also part of the storytelling. What had happened was there was a Land Rover passing outside. And what happened was when I saw it in real life, I remember the advert I was watching. I always enjoyed watching stories about brands from a very young age, including advertisements, especially about brands. And so when I saw it for the first time, I remember that ad because my mother always tells me that I was very attentive when adverts were on TV, when I was watching stories about brands. At that point, I still didn't know I'd be a storyteller and I'd be telling stories about brands and individuals becoming brands or individuals who want to become brands. Whenever I was in school and we learned a new song or a new dance, when I got back home, I'd always sit my mom and dad down and whoever else was around and I'd perform and recite that song. So the storytelling wasn't just watching and telling other stories. It was also life experiences, things I was experiencing. My mother was a teacher, and as early as far back as I could remember, she always brought back books. So my reading proficiency started at a very young age, and I could read well. And as an only child, that was my entertainment. That's what kept me busy most of the time. When I wasn't being told stories by my grandmother, I saw rest in peace, or when I wasn't asking my father or my mother to tell me a bedtime story, a Bible story, that was also part of the storytelling and the evolution. By the time I got in the third grade, I'd written my first article in the school magazine. The story was about my father, who's a preacher and a reverend. He tells stories from the Bible and stories about Jesus. And I'd begun my storytelling too with my first publication in the third grade. I think I was the only third grader. Not I think, I was the only third grader. And they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So every time in church, they asked in Sunday school, not the adult church, who wants to preach. I always had my hand up. I always had a story to tell. This storytelling continued. I remember when I was about in the fourth, fifth grade, there was something called singing games in school. And what would happen is you'd go against different schools and you'd get to perform on the grandest stage. At this point, we'd moved to Kenya. I remember there were only girls in singing games, but I loved to perform, I loved to sing, and I loved to tell stories. So somehow me and a friend of mine, I convinced my friend, and we joined. The teacher let us join. And I remember performing, and my dad came to watch me perform too. I think we came third in that competition, but for me, it wasn't about the win. It was about the storytelling. And storytelling has different dimensions and different forms. Cooking is a form of storytelling. Fashion is a form of storytelling. It's not just limited to literature and to books. Film is a form of storytelling, and music is a form of storytelling. And all these different elements of storytelling will begin to weave in and come into my story. So, about the sixth grade, we moved again. I was a traveling man, just like my grandfather in his book Umana Ashenda, which is a story of him traveling from then northern Rhodesia to Johannesburg in South Africa. My dad's a traveling man, and I too am a traveling man, so it's hereditary. It's in the blood. Storytelling and traveling are who I am. It's who we are as a family. And so in Geneva, I was introduced to a different type of storytelling once again. And this was stage and acting. And I was still from Denzel, who said, I'm not a Hollywood actor, I'm an actor. Because my foundations too go back to stage. I had a very passionate class teacher who loved music, who loved literature, and who loved stage. And so I learned and gleaned in and got a lot of skills I have in my skill set today and in my arsenal. And this kept evolving as time went by. Eventually we came back to Zambia to a school. I went to a school called Chengelo, and that's the tie I'm wearing. That's my school tie with the crest on it. And so as I got to Chengelo, I took literature, and I was also a librarian for 3 years. I spent profuse amount of time in the library reading all types of books, all types of stories. I was always interested and transported to a different world. And as I traveled through these books, I began discovering everything from Greek mythology to trivia, any form of literature, you name it. I read it and I consumed it. One particular book sticks out in literature, and that's Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. That ranks on my top five list of books. And the reason I love it so much is it tells a story about Africa. And as they always say, if we don't tell our own stories as Africans, someone else will. And it was the first time I interacted with a book that told a story about the motherland, but it also resonated with me strongly because there's a character in it called Mfundisi. In the movie, Gabriel L. Jones plays that character, and Don Cheadle was also part of that cast. But that story really resonated with me because I could see myself in that story. My dad's a preacher too, and it was a very touching story, and that's why I love Cry the Beloved Country. I excelled in literature. I never got back some of the stories I wrote from my English teacher because it was so good. And I continued to write and challenge myself. When I wasn't writing stories, I was telling my friends stories. Who knew it would become a career? Who knew it would become the verbatim scribe you know today? But before we get the verbatim scribe, let me continue this story. I eventually finished school. I eventually finished college. Even during college, I used to spend a lot of time in the library reading about music, reading about composition, reading about structure of storytelling. And I eventually also developed my own style of writing, my own style and mode of storytelling. So once I was done with college, I got a job in advertising for an organization called DDB. After 6 months, I got fired. Getting fired was the happiest day of my life because had I not been fired from that job, I wouldn't be the person and the brand that I am today. And you often hear people talk about, no, it wasn't for me, no, things didn't work out. No, I got fired. And it was a bittersweet day, but I always say that was the best day of my life. Getting fired was the best day of my life. It was then that I got a writing gig to write my first online article for a publication called the RNG magazine. So that's another level now of writing. We started with the school magazine. Now we're going international. So the R&G magazine let me write a little satire piece, and it was about Christmas and the Christmas party. So I wrote it in a satirical way, but it's how people should behave when they go for work Christmas party, not getting too drunk and carrying on, and being the bad person that they are. So So, whilst I wrote that article, I said, you know what? Let me start my own blog, and that's how Je suis le critique was born. So that was my first blog. At that time, I didn't become Verbatim Scribe yet. I was the Social Media Esquire. That's what the brand was called, Social Media Esquire. So I focused on things I loved, storytelling, brands about things we love, and just turning them and evolving them into a brand. So I love food. I love critiquing food. If you ever come around, I'm usually watching the Food Network channel, usually watching Chopped. So just the critique initially was me just going to events and going to restaurants and writing critiques about them. And so it got notoriety. It began by me speaking on a panel at the first ever bloggers meeting at Foxdale Court. Foxdale Court turns 15 years. So I've come a long way in my career as a writer. I've come a long way in my career as a storyteller. And it all began at Foxdale Court when I was asked to speak on a panel. So the gigs started coming. And it was at another gig at a reading of a Kane Prize winner and very accomplished author, Namwali Serpo, who at the time hadn't launched the Old Drift yet, but had just won the Kane Prize. After the event, I met the then editor of the Nkwazi magazine, the In-Flight magazine. The Nkwazi magazine is the biggest magazine we have right now and the longest standing in Zambia. And it's the Pro Flight magazine. And so after I spoke to the editor, she said, you have to earn your spot by telling a good story. You have to earn your spot by producing something of quality. And I said, I was up to the task. So off I went to Oktoberfest, and I'm proud to say I did Sheffy 187's first interview in print and other stories. My run at Nkwazi magazine was from January 2016 to January 2017, a solid year. Each issue, back to back stories, lifestyle, entertainment. I wrote it all, satire. And it's a satire piece that caught my dad's attention and also got me a pat on the back. He came back one day from a flight and said, I just read your article in the magazine and you're a pretty good writer. And my mom said, I've never seen any of these articles. I said, well, I don't really read my articles back when I write them or any piece when I write it. But here we are. So I began bringing the magazines home so that my mother could read them. And people around me too began to appreciate the stories that I was writing. Once again, similar to the DDB break, it was time for me to leave and branch off and do my own thing. And so, after a year of doing everything from interviewing UB40 to Mikasa and all sorts of musicians and interesting brands, it was time to move on and begin what you know as Verbatim Scribe today. So, Verbatim Scribe has a simple tagline and a simple motto: a story to tell. And the tagline, a story to tell, simply means and represents that everyone has a story to tell to whatever medium. I skipped the part, of course, of my career where I told stories through clothes. It didn't last long, but I did have a clothing line called Kempson Clothing. But the reason I mention it is because how you dress and who you are also tells a story about you. It's the first story people notice about you. I'm a bit retro and a bit old school because as a writer and as a journalist, you have the liberty of representing yourself as who you are, as a person, as a brand, but also what you believe in. And so I evolve it every now and then, and people call me a Renaissance man. And the Renaissance man is simply a man who changes with season, who grows with season, and also has seasoning. You always gotta have some seasoning and some flavor. Like food without salt, never be bland. And I always tell people eat your dessert first, then eat your main meal. Sweet, then salty. Once people dig into the sweet part, it's easy to dig into the salty part. That's a little bit of what I love, including coffee. Now let me get back to the Verbatim Scribe brand. So the Verbatim Scribe brand has its own standalone platform called Zambia is a Big Deal. The reason I called my platform Zambia is a Big Deal is because Zambia is a big deal. And I wanted to tell stories from Zambia, about Zambians, about brands in Zambia doing big things to the people out there of the world. There's a tagline now people use called Zambia Kuchali. Yeah, we've been doing Zambia Kuchalo for a long time at Verbatim Scribe, and that Zambia is a big deal. Zambia is a big deal has been running for the past 8 years, but I only made money in my 8th year. A lot of people will tell you about businesses making money in the first 3 months. From my experience, I've lost money, I've failed at business, I've failed and started again, I've invested more money, and in year 8, that's when I got my first pay as Verbatim Scribe, as the founder and as a creative director. And it hasn't been smooth sailing from there. But I never stopped telling stories because my next story could be my next big break, just like the opportunity I got just before COVID kicked in. So I bumped into someone and they told me Bloomberg Business Journalism are having a cohort and they're training journalists in business journalism. Are you interested? I said yes. I had no idea or no clue how to start, and it was the last day. But I gave it everything. I was up until 1 solving equations. I was up until 1 writing essays. And guess what? 2 weeks later, they said, we picked you because you were resilient, but also we've never seen someone so passionate. I extended the opportunity to 2 other friends who also joined me in the cohort. And that's how I got my business journalism qualification from Bloomberg. However, during COVID, something else interesting also happened. Everyone wanted to be a writer and no one wanted to be an editor. And that's how Verbatim Scribe expanded into editing. That's how my editing layer came on. So I got an email from a friend of mine, and she's an accomplished writer too, and said, we need someone to edit the short story prize. Are you equal to the task? Not only did I need the money, but at that point, I said, well, since everyone is writing, let me give editing a go. And for the past 4 years, each edition of the Kalemba Short Story Prize has been edited for me. I've read over 600 short stories, each one of them unique, each one of them different, each one of them deserves to be a winner. But there can only be 3 winners. Last year, I had the opportunity of also picking the judges because I told the organizers, look, let's get younger people, let's get some fresh blood, let's get some new voices involved. So other people got an opportunity to do that. I'm proud to say I've edited Ngoma award-winning manuscript. The book that won in 2022 was edited by me. And I've also edited winners of other prizes, and I continue to edit to this day. What am I saying with all this? In whatever craft you practice, whatever you do in life, you're telling a story. It doesn't matter what it is. We started with the past, we took a trip to the present, and when I look at my future, I want to be the first Zambian to win the Man Booker Prize. It will take me a little while because I'm still working on that novel, but I will be the winner of the Man Booker Prize. What else do I do besides Verbatim Scribe and telling stories? Well, I always say everyone has a past and everyone has a present. My past was not so good. I had some dark times and some gray areas. And that's how I came up with Outlier Reform and Reintegration Initiative. The motto of that is turning negative pasts into positive futures. So I help people struggling with addiction. I help people struggling with depression. I help people struggling with grief. And I help people struggling with various challenges in life as a trained career coach and life coach. So, storytelling isn't just one sided to the good parts. You also want to hear the stories of what people are going through and help them turn those negative stories into positive stories. So, that's what my podcast Therapy Bro was about a year ago. Episodes will be going up on YouTube soon. I've managed to edit them and get them to where I want to be. But I had different people coming tell stories about mental health and raising awareness about mental health. Mental health is not 1D. It's not a one-dimensional thing. It's got so many layers to it. And sometimes people just want someone to talk to, someone to listen. And I'm there to listen and turn those negative pasts into positive futures. That's another dimension of my storytelling. So recently I attended the Platinum Authors Conference. That was last week, Thursday. I was invited, and it was the first time. It was the inaugural one. It was good to be around writers. It was good to be around accomplished authors. It was good to be around publishers. It was good to be around editors. It also challenged me to start telling stories again. I'd taken a hiatus in 2023, but in 2025, expect to see more stories on Zambia as a big deal. Expect to see award-winning stories from me on the continent and internationally, and expect me to be published very soon. I've got a few stories to tell that need to be put in print. I've got a few stories to tell to continue the legacy of my grandfather, to continue the legacy of my father too, who are also prolific storytellers. I didn't introduce myself on purpose because I wanted you to hear my story first before you hear my name. A good story always precedes a name. My name, Akampamba Bluki. I'm the founder and CEO of Verbatim Scribe. This has been my story, and this has been my story to tell. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. Look out for my books. The platform is very simple. It's just www.zambia is a big deal. You can follow me on, let me type my social handles in the chat, as well as my site and other places you can catch me. All right, folks, I'll let you go catch up with the Zambia game versus Russia. For those of you who love soccer, I appreciate you for tuning in. I appreciate the comments. I saw everyone in the comment section. And please tell your story, tell it the best way you know how, and represent yourself the best way you know how. Thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in. You have a lovely evening. This has been a Project Life Design brand presentation. We've got the Real Women Summit coming up in April. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be phenomenal. My life coach and mentor, Dr. Nelly, will be headlining it. This is the 7th one. So please grab those tickets. Reach out to Project Life Design. They've got you and they'll cover you. Okay, I'm just typing my contacts and my details once again.